All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Greetings from Stavanger, Norway. My name is Clay Cardozo, and today we're going to take a look at how an evidence-based approach can help solve a lot of the questions that come up when it comes to conversational AI and design. So first, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's webinar, so if you have to leave early for some reason or you run into connectivity issues, don't worry. We'll be sending a link to the full recording afterwards. And then also, if you have questions, I think both of us love questions. So if you go to the Q&A button, you can enter your questions there, not in the chat, in the Q&A. And then we will save time at the end to be able to go through those questions. If for some reason we can't get to your question, we'll make sure that somebody follows up with you. But as far as what we're going to be talking about today, with the exception of any major tangents, we'll look at a few major themes. So, first, why are we talking about this? Why is an evidence-based approach important when it comes to conversational AI design? And then how do we actually turn chat logs and all that data into actionable insights? And then finally, what are some of the findings and guidelines that we've been able to uncover through this process? So I have here with me my colleague, Cameron Taylor, who's our UX research lead and is really the driving force behind a lot of the ideas that we'll be talking about today. So Cam, do you want to just give a little bit about your background and what you do here?
Yeah, I'm Cam. So I did a PhD in linguistics. I looked at the syntax of Irialis clauses, which is basically like word order in constructions where we're talking about imaginary worlds. And I was interested in thinking about bringing some of the research methods and some of the thinking in terms of human-human interaction to human-robot interaction. So that's what's brought me here to Stavanger, to Boost. And here we basically do research looking at all aspects of user interaction, both from things like kind of how users create their mental models and set their expectations of their interaction with the bot to, kind of detailed language-based stuff, some of which we'll talk about today. Yeah.
Okay, very good. I'm a strategic partner manager here. And actually, prior to being at Boost, I was doing UX design in New York. And I was actually, very interested in what Cam was doing here as far as taking some of those traditional UX research methodologies and applying it to AI and specifically conversational AI. Now I work with a lot of our partners who are walking clients through many of these decisions. And so I think this will be an interesting talk today. So I think we've introduced ourselves. Now I'd like to introduce you to somebody else, Albert, who's our end user persona today. And he's going to guide some of our conversation. As far as who Albert is, he's a young father. He recently had a daughter, but also has a very busy engineering career. So between home and work, he doesn't have a lot of free time on his hands, but he's really determined to get his finances in better order, especially making sure that he sets up a good future for his daughter. So has a few main goals in mind, wants to build more savings. He also is looking to manage his short-term expenses, especially trying to get a postponement on his mortgage payment. And then to try to avoid some of the stress that he's dealing with now, he'd like to be better prepared for the future with goals like retirement. But he has some different potential challenges in his way. One is that he's constantly running from one meeting to another or from work to picking up his daughter, and those are usually those little bits of time where he actually has to explore these things. He also has little time to call during normal hours with the type of work schedule that he has, and then he's not always really sure where to start. He's unfamiliar with his options, and so that's a challenge that's facing him as well. So I guess from your standpoint, how are you looking at this persona so far?
Oh, yeah. Well, firstly, Clay, this is a really great idea when you're approaching designing your VA to start with a persona like Albert, because it'll help you. It will obviously kind of get much clearer and much easier results with this. So if you have in mind that he can often only address people while, sorry, he can only look at he's only going to be engaging with this bot when he's mostly on the move, right?
Right.
So he's probably going to be on his mobile phone, right?
Yep.
So we want to think, okay, as we're designing it, making sure that we're planning the conversation flows with a busy person who's looking at this conversation on their phone in mind, right?
Mhm.
The fact that he's unfamiliar with the options. This is we need to keep in mind a UX principle that we've actually discussed in before around findability.
Mhm.
So often people talk about findability with GUIs, but we want to actually think about how can we bring that principle of making the user aware of what the possibilities are within the context of the chat.
I see. Yeah,
Yeah,
I could see that being a challenge.
yeah.
Okay. So then the question is, how can a positive conversational AI experience really help connect Albert to his goals?
Mhm.
And then the question on the flip side is, what if that's not a positive experience? So, from your perspective, what do you see as the risk to that?
For Albert, it's that he probably throws and smashes his phone. Like, you
Sounds like a lose lose situation all around. Okay, so I think it's not controversial to say that we all aim for a strong user experience, but the question is more what sets the direction for good UX with conversational AI? What defines that?
Mm,
And I think that for this particular technology, historically, it's been easy to get caught up in trying to focus on making it as human-like as possible.
mhm.
But the question is, especially when it comes to addressing the goals of Albert, is that more important to his needs, or is it providing an easier path to getting those things taken care of? Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a really, really interesting point, a really good point to be bringing up. People talk about making human-like interactions or human-like conversations. And when I hear that, I sometimes think, yeah, I've actually had a lot of human interactions that I wouldn't like to repeat.
We
So-
don't need to replicate those.
exactly. So,
No.
so, so I think focusing on actual needs,
Yeah.
end user needs, is going to end up. You're going to end up with a much better result more often.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question, and there's many other questions that can be difficult to answer in this space, and sometimes that difficulty actually increases when we're closer in the technology.
Hmm.
I think data can really offer a guide for us to look beyond that
Hmm.
and really step outside of our own biases,
Hmm.
because especially working in the technology, yes, our expertise matters, and here at Boost we have a lot of great minds, and that's really important to delivering a great product. But at the same time, there's also all these other views and preferences that a user base represents, and we want to take that into account as well.
Hmm.
So if we look at maybe a very simple conversation design example, we have, let's say this is an AI trainer who's putting in a response. They look at it and they say, hey, a great way to answer this would be to put in a smiley face emoji at the end, and that seems very straightforward, especially from kind of their day-to-day focus. But if we look outside of that, there may be a number of people that have different views on that, and and some different complexities. If we think about Albert, hopefully his issue is more realistic than a smile allergy, but he's just having a bad day, or I think maybe more relevant that based on the subject matter, he doesn't see that smiley face is setting the right tone.
Hmm.
And so we can't see all those people, but we can see that there's a potential disconnect with how we're looking at it on our end and how it might be received from the users.
That's right.
So the question is, which opinion is the right one? And I think most of us feel that our opinion is the right one. But in actuality, we really can't say that any of them is the right opinion,
Mhm.
because essentially each of those opinions reflects a valid user experience. And we have to keep that in mind.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to try to make everyone happy, right? I think that's nearly impossible, and it would probably drive us crazy trying to do so.
Mhm.
But there's an opportunity here where if we can combine high quality data with our expertise,
Mhm.
then we can start to make more intentional decisions about what will have the most impact for the widest number of users,
Yeah.
especially given the use cases at hand.
Mhm.
So then the question is, where do we find that data? And I think that's where, at least with Boost AI, it's not just the number of live virtual agents that we have deployed, but it's also the variety that's interesting
Yeah.
because we have those virtual agents for different verticals.
Mhm.
So whether it be banking or insurance or telco, public sector, utilities, health, but then also within those verticals, different use cases, different things that those organizations are trying to solve,
Mhm.
whether it be customer service or sales or internal human resources, and then all the nuances in between.
Yeah.
And then you have different countries and all the different languages that come into play there. So
Mhm.
for what you do in your world, why do you see this variety as significant?
Well, we're in a really unique position at Boost, and I think to have this variety is really it's a gold mine. It's really special. Oftentimes people that are doing research on conversational AI or sort of like human computer interaction. Their data set will be limited to a particular vertical
Mm,
or to a particular use case. Um, Whereas, at least from our perspective, we are able to kind of take a bird's eye view of what's going on more generally
yep.
because we can take it. There's so much, the diversity of data is so, we really can get some general insights and kind of see where, okay, maybe this might happen in this sector, but that may not be true. It's not kind of applicable to what happens in another sector, but we can actually see those differences because we kind of have this variety of data, which is
Mm.
really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds great. I
Mhm.
think, at the same time, there could be a lot of people and organizations that look at that collection of chat logs and data and maybe feel a little overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and maybe a little uncertain of how do we actually take these loads of chat logs and actually turn that into insights that we can do something about
Right.
and give us direction.
Hmm.
And I think that's further complicated because a lot of that analysis seems to be more qualitative.
Yeah.
Why is that with conversational AI? Why is a lot of the analysis more qualitative than quantitative?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of the quantitative data that, we know that we have in the conversation analytics, you have things like prediction accuracy, and that'll take you so far.
Mhm.
That's really important information. Um, but when we start looking at the chat logs themselves, you start to see a little bit of a more nuanced picture about how users are actually experiencing their interaction with the bot. And so, some of the difficulty with language is that um, it's a very it's a very nuanced data set, right?
Right.
So language is really ambiguous. It's messy. It's really human.
Yep.
It's like uh, I say this, but I meant that, and we all have had those kind of conversations at home where you're like, I didn't say that.
I don't know what you're talking about. That never happened to me.
Yeah, yeah. So at least, and in person, you can kind of clarify between you, but actually, when you're looking at it on this, when you're looking at chat log data, you're sort of taking language data. You don't have the benefit of referencing whoever said what they said, and it can be really difficult, but it's possible to actually
Mm.
analyze it and to get some useful insights out of it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And so then if a lot of that analysis is more qualitative,
Mhm.
why do we need to have a more structured approach to really handle that qualitative analysis?
Yeah, so if you take a more structured approach to looking at your chat log data and kind of getting useful insights from these qualitative analyses, then you can actually start to turn some of that qualitative data into quantitative data,
Mm,
right? So if once you, with the benefit of over time, you start to see trends, and we'll talk a little bit about
right.
like, yeah, how we can how we can kind of make sense of some of this. Yeah,
Okay, sounds
yeah,
good. Yeah, I think
yeah.
if you could kind of walk us through what are the two ways that you look at qualitative analysis.
Oh yeah. Okay. So when I take a um, chat log, um, I look at, or I try and sort of, you can break it down into two parts. So one is that you can look at the individual turns. Now by turn I mean, in normal conversation, the two of us, for example, we're talking right now, I say something and then I finish and then you say something,
Hmm.
right? So that's, in human interaction, that's called a turn. So we have the same kind of interaction with robots, right?
Hmm.
So the robots, I say something, the robot says something, that's one turn.
Hmm. Is the robot the whole time while you're talking just waiting to speak itself, just waiting for you
Yeah,
to stop? Is
just
that the
tapping its
same too?
foot. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Not listening, not paying attention,
Okay.
just sort of like
All right.
interjecting
Good. Just wanted
whatever.
to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then we have the entire dialogue, which is where, this is kind of what we're more familiar with, and this is from the very beginning of the interaction to the very end.
Mm,
And here you kind of, you can look at, um, broader goals, like you can see, for example, okay, from the first, thing that a person says, you kind of get a sense of what they're looking for, and then you can look at the, throughout the conversation, and by the end, have they actually got that need met,
mm,
right? Which is, you can't necessarily see that in, individual turns, right?
mm.
Hmm.
Okay, that makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was starting to maybe look at this, I think my initial instinct would be to look more at full dialogues.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you break it down in turns. Why is that necessary to look at it in such a granular level?
Um, the so the with entire dialogues, you might be able to see kind of broad trends,
Hmm.
like, okay, are kind of user needs being met in general, but you might not necessarily, be able to tell where and how that actually happens. So if you look at individual turns, you can get a more granular, specific, look at, okay, this is exactly where the conversation went right, and this is exactly where it went wrong. And then from there, you can actually pull general principles that you can use when you're designing other conversations or designing other kind of interactions, in the future.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's look at turns. What are the two different ways you look at turns?
When I look at a turn, I look for two things. First is the response adequate? So is it relevant to what to the previous turn, right? So, and then the second thing is, does the user understand, or do we think the user understood what that response was? Those two things are really important, and I think are the two things that you want to look at when you look at a turn.
Okay, so
Uh-huh.
let's look at some examples.
Hmm.
Let's look at adequacy first.
Yeah.
So let's say in this turn, the user asks, "Yeah, I'd like to know the interest rate on my home loan."
Hmm.
Sure thing. You have a fixed rate interest on your mortgage set at 6.54%.
Yeah. So this is a relevant response, right? And we know that because, the information that's given in the, at the end, the robot gives, is directly related to the request from the user. And so it's just as important to know when something goes right and why,
Mm,
as it is when something goes wrong. But this is what we would qualify as a relevant response, right?
okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at the next one.
Hmm.
Money's tight. Let's say this is Albert. Can I delay my home loan payment?
Hmm.
Congrats on finding a new home. We can get started on your loan now.
Right. So this poor stressed man gets a false positive, right? So he's, basically, uh, the robot here thinks that it's given the right response
Mm,
because it sees home and loan, right? And so it's given a response. It's directed to an intent where the response is something about home and loan,
mm,
right? But, it's kind of left out what is going to be really important for the end user, which is delay, right?
mm.
So for us, we recognize, okay, delay is a really, important thing to understand in the
Okay.
context of this sentence. So this obviously is going to, not be a relevant reply to the user, right?
Yeah, I don't think Albert's going to be too happy about that.
No.
All right, let's look at the next one. He's interested in savings. So, what
Mhm.
savings accounts do you have? I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
So this is, pretty typical, in robot interactions.
Mhm.
So this is our, a kind of example of a false negative, where, um, you know, firstly, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question, in the context of a person asking a banking bot. about savings
We would
accounts.
assume that that's a pretty general question. Yeah.
Exactly. It's definitely within scope. So, okay, why can't you understand this question? So
Mhm.
you're immediately losing trust here. And there's specific ways we can talk about when you want to fix like this kind of reply. We'll get into that, I think, later, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So let's look at the last one, which if you're keeping score at home, you probably know which one this is going to be. But let's see here. All right. I think one of my chats snuck in here. I have no rhythm. I'm sorry. I can't help you with that.
Right. So, so unless the bank is offering tango lessons, this is going
Ah,
to be out of scope.
it's an interesting business idea.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to end this webinar early. We have some business planning to do. But
Yeah.
no, I would assume we're not expecting that to be within the scope
No.
of a banking bot.
No.
Okay.
So that's the user's fault.
Sounds good. So let's look at understandability.
Yeah.
So we have what are the benefits of the pathway card, assuming that that's a card specific to the bank.
Mhm.
The pathway card is usually offered with lower interest rates. Great. Can I apply?
Mhm. This looks like it's likely understandable, and you can tell for two reasons. One, the response from the robot is directly correlated to the request, and also the follow up from the user is directly related to the previous turn, and
Mm,
it's asking for a continuation, right?
mm,
So we know, okay, this is right. This is going something's going really right here, and this is the users understood this.
good.
Yeah.
So if we compare that to I need help building savings. And then these are two clickable buttons that are
Mhm.
offered, Flex Express and Power Yield,
Yeah.
but I want to save.
Right. So this we see a lot. This kind of thing we see a lot, and here we're witnessing that there's likely some understandability issues,
Mm,
right? Um, uh, the Even though the answer may be correct in a sense from the bot, in terms of the prediction is right,
okay.
the answer doesn't look understandable because there's a lot of banking jargon here. There's no context provided for the user. If I don't know anything about Flex Express or Power Yield, those terms, which I probably don't if I'm not in finance, then,
Right.
or for this particular institution, actually, then I won't understand what this means. I mean, you worked in finance, you must be familiar with this
Yeah.
kind of thing.
I mean, I can definitely relate to that. There was so much jargon that we would use in the office every day.
Right.
And so there was so much danger to then when we'd go out and speak to clients, then all of a sudden that wouldn't translate as well.
Hmm.
And fortunately, in that case, we would actually see maybe a blank stare for the person we're talking to, but
Right.
we don't always have the benefit of that when it comes to this type of experience, right?
No, and this is actually a really easy one to miss. So we
Mm,
might think because the prediction score is really good here,
mhm.
you actually might think, oh, this is fine. This is work. But clearly, if you think about it from the user's perspective, this has gone wrong,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
All right. So now let's take a look at entire dialogues.
Hmm.
So how do you look at these?
Okay, so I look for two things if I take an entire dialogue. One, I want to know, has the user received the support that they needed? So, what's the outcome of the dialogue? And the second is how efficient was it? So, what's the efficiency exchange looking like?
Okay.
Mhm.
So walk us through a dialogue outcome.
So I put these into four categories. So
Hmm.
I put dialogues into four categories. So one is that the user received relevant help and that the user actually used that help.
Okay.
The second is that the user received relevant help and it doesn't look like they used the help. So, for example, they were given a reply which contained a link, a URL link or something, and they probably didn't click it. It looks like they ignored it, right?
Got it.
That's fine because that's just, we can't do anything about that.
Hmm.
The third is that escalation has been offered. So the bot hasn't understood, or there's been some failure of interpretation or
Hmm.
something, and they goes, "Okay, I don't understand this. I'm going to escalate you to my manager or whatever."
Okay. Is
Yeah.
that necessarily a bad thing?
No, not
Oh.
at all. It's not that you know this. We're trying to facilitate human computer cooperation here. We're not trying to replace people, and that's like it would be like saying, you know, is the you wouldn't want to replace an accountant with a calculator, right?
Mm.
For example, right? So
Could be good for some things, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, makes their job a little easier, but yeah. Yeah, so and then the fourth category would be that there's no relevant help offered at all. So not only have they not got any relevant help, but they also haven't been escalated to the humans. So they've been, this is kind of like phone smashing territory, right?
Got
Like,
it. Albert has officially reached that level,
right.
danger zone,
Yeah.
phone throw. Okay.
Hmm.
All right. So now we look at, compared to outcome, we look at efficiency.
Hmm.
And I think this is really interesting to me as far as, looking at efficiency from more of a traditional UX perspective
Yeah.
with user interfaces like a website or an
Yeah.
app. We might look at that more traditionally as, how quickly can they reach their goal.
Hmm.
And so, when it comes to a conversation,
Hmm.
we might think, okay, maybe that's, how many turns are involved,
Yeah.
and trying to have a lower number of that.
Right.
Is that necessarily always the case?
Not necessarily. You know, obviously, the quicker the better
Hmm.
for the user most of the time. But one of the real advantages of conversational AI, um, uh, as opposed to other like communication interfaces, apart from human-human dialogues, is that the robot can actually guide the user to understand their needs a little bit better sometimes. So
Mm,
maybe they say something really generic, and then the robot realizes, okay, actually, you need to get more specific with me in order to get to what exactly you need, right?
got it.
And so in that case, you got to get more turns, but I would still consider that as an efficient exchange.
Okay, so maybe we see that in this example where
Yeah,
maybe Albert is interested in opening a joint account with somebody that's mentioned, Dave,
right.
but maybe doesn't understand some of the things that he might need to consider in doing
Hmm.
so. And so
Yeah,
the question is, oh, okay, is this a joint account with a spouse?
right.
No.
Hmm.
Will the owner be a minor? Nope.
Hmm.
So there are some key things to keep in mind, and then
Hmm.
there's a button to learn more.
Yes. Yeah. Hmm.
So I've walked him through that process
Yeah.
essentially.
Hmm.
So if we compare that now to break in dialogue flow,
Hmm.
same initial question. I'd like to open and joint account with Dave.
Hmm.
I don't know Dave. But what about the joint account? We have joint accounts. What would you like to know? I'd like to open one.
Right. Yeah. So this is this is the kind of thing we expect actually from robot exchanges, right? So these sort of broken conversations. Normally, when we go into conversations with another person, we expect that when I say something, at least for the first 5 minutes of the conversation, the
Hmm.
other person
Hmm.
will keep in their mind or maintain in their memory some of what I said, right?
Mm,
And that allows us that we kind of set the context for the conversation and then we can kind of let it flow, right? So here, there's kind of no contextually relevant information passing on throughout the flow, which then creates a really choppy, inefficient conversation,
got it.
right?
Okay,
Hmm.
that seems clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's a question of, what do we do with this? We've looked at these different labels for terms
Hmm.
and for dialogues, and
Hmm.
then out of those, we have these three labels for turns and four for dialogues that are potentially problematic.
Yeah.
So what do you do from here?
So here we now you can label now as you label all the conversations and you label the different turns and sort of and the overall dialogues, you can kind of start to get to a place where we're turning the qualitative analysis into something a little bit more quantitative,
Mm,
right? So now we can start to talk about statistical outcomes and kind of take a look at, for example, okay, what percentage of these conversations we exhibit false positives, for example.
got it.
What percentage of these conversations offer no relevant help, and then there are very specific ways of fixing these different problems, which we can talk about, I think,
Yep.
also next. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we can start to take a look at, where do these insights actually show up in our product?
Yes. Well, okay. So, one that we're all probably the most familiar with is like, we get a lot of false negatives,
Mm,
right? Well, this is clearly an issue with the NLU,
mm,
right? So we need to kind of focus something about our intent hierarchy, or we need to improve the quality of our training data or create more training data,
mm,
right? So that we're kind of getting where things are within scope, that we're getting that understanding. um, where we're finding, for example, you had the example of the broken conversations that was really inefficient.
mm,
Well, maybe we want to turn to some of our technical architecture. So to kind of enrich the dialogue flows so that we can actually get a conversation that kind of maintains its contextual relevance like throughout the flow,
Mm.
right? And that's true. I mean, we can basically these insights can be applied to all four of these areas, but that's just a couple of examples.
Okay, so that's how that it can kind of direct us behind the scenes. Then it's a question of how does this impact the user,
Hmm.
and it seems like there's a lot of different ways that that could be.
Yeah.
But let's take a look at visual architecture first,
Hmm.
and we'll start with an example that I would say is more of a maybe a classic quantitative analysis,
Hmm.
and that we looked at our own website and we asked ourselves, how could we increase traffic to our own virtual agent Boostman on
Right.
the website?
Hmm.
And so we took our boost man and gave him a makeover, turning him from this into, wait for it, that completely unrecognizable. And just with that little change of the adding the notification bubble with no other changes, that led to an increase in traffic to Boostman of 100%,
Right.
which obviously is important to the business, and this
Mhm.
is what we see. A number of organizations are looking to increase that number,
Mhm.
but also from a user perspective, that's we would assume going to make it easier for Albert to actually find the solution. And
Absolutely.
as good as we can make the actual virtual agent, if he can't find it, then that could be a user experience issue too, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that seems significant.
Mhm.
Now, I do wonder though at the same time that, as he gets used to seeing that
Mhm.
and, seeing notification bubbles,
Yeah.
that might start to turn into just the regular landscape that he sees, and maybe that he stops recognizing that as much, or it's standing out to him as much.
Yeah.
So, it would seem like maybe we need to continue to return to that data, right?
Unfortunately, a researcher's job never ends. So
Can't just set it and forget it.
you can't just set it and forget it.
Okay.
Yeah, you kind of always have to return to the data and keep, updating and looking at new analysis and actually, the world is always changing and
Yeah.
people's expectations are changing. As you say, the data is going to change as the technology becomes more widely available. People's, ideas about what they expect and how they find the product will also change, right?
Mhm.
And so forth. So yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So now let's switch over to conversation design.
Mhm.
So, can you take us through a few examples?
Yeah. Okay, so we oh yeah, this is a study that we looked at. We wanted to take a look at best practices for conversation repair. So this is basically how the virtual agent responds when it's not confident in the prediction.
Okay.
So when I say conversation repair, this is what happens in human-human dialogues or conversations all the time. We're always making mistakes. We're always having understandability issues between us. So we have these repair strategies. So if I say something like, uh, you know, uh, I wanted a, you go, so sorry, did you say what? What did you say? Huh? Right. So that,
That's
huh?
happened between us before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So that, huh, is a kind of conversation repair strategy. But we have more specific ones. So obviously more formally, you go, what?
Mhm.
But you might say, if you think you heard something but you weren't quite sure, did you say salad? Right?
Mhm.
That's a strategy. Or you might offer a pair of alternatives. So you might say something like, did you want tacos or pizza?
Mm.
Right? So these are different conversation repair strategies that we have, and we can use those repair strategies. We can program the robots to actually do the same.
Got it.
Yeah. One of the things that happens often when people have conversations with robots is the robot has no idea what it's talking about,
Mhm.
gives you some sort of false positive, gives you three totally irrelevant, maybe
Mhm.
alternatives. And it's like, okay, clearly this bot has not understood me. It's
Right.
just giving me something,
Right.
right? So the user doesn't feel listened to. On the other hand, you can test where if you can use the understanding that the robot gets. Maybe the prediction accuracy isn't that high, but it's kind of okay. It's in the sort of uh, 80-ish% range. It's kind of mostly sure.
Mhm.
So then it tells you, okay, well, actually, I think it might be about this.
Mhm.
Then even if you don't get the right answer, you kind of the person's thinking, this is a really intelligent system, right? So whereas previously, if you just sort of like throw out kind of three random answers, you go, this is a really stupid bot, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if it's kind of done some thinking, even if it doesn't arrive to the right answer, you know, okay, it's doing some thinking there, and then actually that changes the user experience a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, even for humans, sometimes we assume we have to project complete confidence and, we don't want to give uncertainty. But then at the same time, I think we usually respond pretty well to that, right? Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. That's absolutely right. And we know that in human dialogues where if somebody doesn't know something and they admit it,
Hmm.
we tend to prefer that than them sort of just kind of spurting out this certain answer, which is obviously wrong, right? You go, oh, what a jerk, right? so, so
Understood.
yeah. So we know that there was a study done uh, testing this principle on chatbots, except it was done using scripts. So it was sort of there was a script, and the researcher wanted to know, okay, would you prefer would the end users prefer that the bot gave an uncertain answer,
Mhm.
or just sort of three random things or something like that, and obviously people actually preferred the uncertainty response,
Mhm.
but this wasn't tested on any live data.
Mm.
So what we did was we decided to test this on live data, using our data, and we to see what we could determine with the advantage of real conversation. So we set up an experiment where um, we sort of analyzed conversations before using this uncertainty approach, and then we analyzed conversations after this using this uncertainty approach. And we assumed that it would better align with user expectations, right? So
Mm.
because we like, as I said, we kind of like it when people are uncertain if they don't know the answer,
Right.
right? And the question is, in addition to we know we can kind of align with user expectations, but would this have any impact on helping users get what they need,
Mm.
right? Because like you said in the beginning, it's not actually always about, well, we want to make this more human.
Mm.
Like, it
Mhm.
depends, right? But we want to make sure they can get what they need. So you can see here that the impact of the adding the uncertainty responses is that the amount of users receiving no relevant help decreased.
Mhm.
So that's good. So that means that those false negatives went down. Um, getting help offered but not used, and also, or maybe likely used, that didn't really change. There's
Mhm.
not actually much. You can see these percentages aren't like, that's not statistically significant,
Mhm.
but that's fine because we wouldn't expect like a change with like
Right.
helpful responses. And then the amount of human escalations increased.
Right. Which you said is not a bad thing. That could be actually
Yeah, the
help
bot
a
doesn't
good user
know.
experience,
Yeah,
right?
the bot doesn't know, so it goes, "Okay, I'm gonna ask my boss." Right? Right?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
That's
And
sometimes needed.
in customer service, people really like to, "I wanna talk to your manager,"
Right.
right? That comes up a
I've
lot.
had a few of those calls.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So okay, right. So where's the study? So we already had some expectations about the user's initial reaction to the VA expressing this uncertainty.
Mhm.
And the data showed that we could both cater to this preference and still guide the user to a helpful result. So now we can actually recommend this as a conversation design strategy, right? So we want to say, if you have the ability to do so, you should be expressing uncertainty where your prediction rates aren't, or your percentage prediction rates aren't that high, but they're kind of high.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Let's take a look at another example then.
Yeah. So we did another study where we wanted to uh, test, find out what users' experience was like when they got buttons
Mhm.
or were asked for a free text input. So, okay, this means that whenever the robot is having a conversation with a human, sometimes the robot needs information from you,
Mm.
right? So, because it needs to kind of guide you down a further pathway to give you the help you need.
Mhm.
So one way of doing this is, okay, you asked me something, and I know I need more information, so I'm going to present you with a list of buttons.
Mhm.
And one of the downsides to this is, you might present buttons and there might not be the option that you're looking for, right? So people might feel a little bit trapped potentially,
Right.
right? On the other hand, you could ask the users just an open-ended question like we do in natural
Hmm.
conversations, and then hope that they respond, give you something that you can understand
Right.
back,
Okay.
right? So there's kind of pluses and minuses to both,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, which one do you think, if I were to ask you before I tell you what happened, like,
You're putting me on the spot.
yeah, that people
Well, I would
preferred?
assume that, as you said, it was more of a natural conversation that, at least typically as we've usually tried to have things be more human-like and more natural,
Yeah.
that free text would usually be the better option.
Yeah. Most people, I assume that most people assume that that's kind of what we assume because it kind of, the user's not feeling that restricted. It kind of feels a bit more natural. And the answer is actually that it depends. Sorry.
I think the folks at Boost have heard you say that a few times. Okay. It depends.
Yeah. When we tested both of these approaches on two different scenarios. So we
Mm,
had a task-led conversation, so applying for a credit card, and then we had a more topic-led conversation. So we wanted to test in a situation where the user was trying to get pension
mm,
advice.
okay.
And what we found, I'm just kind of cutting to the chase here,
Mhm,
is that when users are engaged in task-based conversations, they actually tend to prefer uh, buttons.
mhm,
So Albert is applying for a credit card. He says, "I'd like to apply for a credit card." The robot says, "Okay, this, or this,"
right.
right?
Okay.
We want to just get through it.
Yeah.
He's on the move. He's like going between things. He just wants to get it done really
Mhm,
quickly. He doesn't want to have to think, well, what is the bot, what is the bot asking me about, and how
mhm,
do I figure it out? Right? None of that. On the other hand, if in the topic-led conversation, so where he's doesn't actually have a specific goal, but he's just kind of in more of an exploratory frame of mind, then he, and this is where he's learning about pension plans,
mhm,
then he would prefer the free text
mhm.
conversation, because when he doesn't really know what he wants, being presented with a list of options just feels really artificial.
Got it.
You're like, I'm not hungry. I don't want like pizza, tacos, or spaghetti. I'm
Right.
not interested,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
And you might be doing this in more of a stationary environment based on that type of activity, we would think. Okay.
yeah. He's probably sitting on a park bench, dreaming about, I don't know.
That's how I always research my retirement plan.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's look at the last one, personality of the
Hmm.
virtual agent.
Yeah.
I think this is a question that many of our clients and partners can struggle with, right?
Yes, yes. This comes up a lot.
Hmm.
The question of what kind of personality should I build into my VA?
Hmm.
What is the scientific answer to this question? Well, actually, the answer is nuanced.
Yep.
Okay, I'm not going to say it.
Good self-constraint.
but but what we know is that um, end users project personality onto the VA no matter what you've thought of.
Mm,
So it's something to do with there's a subconscious trigger, I think, that they encounter language, they encounter something that's interactive, and there's language involved, and it goes, okay, there's a soul here, or consciousness, or it's intelligent. There's something there, and we just kind of assume that. We take it for granted subconsciously, even if we say we don't.
mhm,
We've actually seen studies where people say, "I know, we know that the bot is stupid," but then they do things like they say please to the bot or whatever to treat
mm,
it politely and stuff like that. You go, okay, no. So there's something where we kind of come to the bot and we actually automatically project a personality. Okay.
got it.
So first, the answer, I want to say that no matter what you think you're doing,
Hmm.
users are going to come up with their own vision for what that personality is. So I would recommend, rather than and it can be really good. It can be really helpful to think about what kind of personality you want your bot to have particularly for the team,
Hmm. Mm.
for the continuation and like kind of coherence of a project, also in thinking about the coherence of the action replies. And so when you pass it on to other AI trainers and other team members, it's nice to kind of, for the internal project success to have a personality for the spot. It just makes it more fun. But your users aren't, that's not necessarily going to translate to your users. But what will translate to your users is, are they getting their needs met? Are the conversations efficient in the way that we talked about earlier? Am I reaching what I want to reach? And in that way, if you actually focus on getting the user's needs met, then the personality that the users will project often are the ones that you kind of
Got it.
want them to, right? So
Yep.
you go, oh, wait, that was a really friendly, efficient, helpful bot,
No.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings us back to Albert, right?
Yeah.
Is that, well, for one, is the question of, why have we been talking about this imaginary person
Mhm.
through this conversation?
Mhm.
And, a big part of that is that having this persona defined of reflecting needs that are outside of our own
Yeah,
helps to keep that focus on making the design, the target of the design, making the path easier for the user. And
definitely.
so if we can accomplish that
Mhm.
and continue to focus on his needs, the needs of the users,
Mhm.
and really support that with an evidence-based approach using the data that's at hand, then the idea is that we would assume that his trust in the solution is going to go up,
Mhm.
which means that he's going to use it more and use it for more things,
Mhm.
which seems to be a productive thing for his goals. But then at the same time, when we think about what are the goals of the business that's deploying this technology, that also helps them get closer to their goals of
Mhm.
why are they using this technology in the first place.
Yep.
Because if we assume that a user like Albert is using the technology more, that he's trusting it more and doing more advanced things with it, then let's say it decreases that log jam to customer service teams
Mm.
because he's going to that first more. And then also there's a higher chance that he's going to be using it to take care of other actions, and especially more sensitive actions like self-service sales and things that will actually increase profitability for the business.
Yeah.
So I think we've seen that conversational AI does not solve all problems.
Mhm.
It's probably not going to solve my rhythm issues, but
Unless they offer tango classes.
unless we do that. But I think we can see that if it's done right, if it's done with the right technology, if it's deployed in a way that's user centric and taking that evidence based approach,
Mhm.
then there can be some really interesting results as far as how it can make life easier for both the user and for the businesses, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And so I think that's something that for those of you who are listening today, if you're facing some of those challenges, if you're facing some of these questions, feel free to reach out to us because we are deploying more customized user experiences at faster speeds, and I think that would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Mm.
But let's see what questions that you all have. So let's take a look. If you haven't already, you can go ahead and put your questions again in the Q&A section. So give a little time for people to put in some questions. Maybe you did such a good job of answering all those.
No questions. Nobody's-
We'll give
Uh,
it a few more minutes. Any other thoughts that you want to share from our conversation? Besides maybe some plans for our Tango Bank.
Tango Bank. I think people, people find it really difficult, and understandably so, to know what to do with chat log data.
Mhm,
Often I find, I think we kind of go, this is, like you said in the beginning, what a mess,
mhm.
right? There's just too much here. I don't have the time for this. I actually have to worry about my prediction rates. So, maybe you don't have time to do it. And actually, I would suggest you reach out to a researcher or a linguist to come
Mhm.
in and work on a project for your company or something. I think that's another way of dealing with it. Yeah.
Excellent.
Hmm.
All right, so we have some questions that have come in.
Oh.
Um, how would I make the AI start with a red dot on the homepage like you did with Boostman?
Uh-huh.
Um, So, I mean, I think, beyond some of the more of the design questions of how to put that in,
Mhm.
um, yeah, this is probably both outside of our realm necessarily,
Talk to your
but
marketing department.
yeah, I would say talk to marketing,
Yeah.
talk to whoever is actually designing that avatar
Yeah.
or that logo.
Yeah.
That's generally, I think, the quickest fix if I've understood your question correctly.
Mhm. But that actually highlights the importance of the team working with the VA, that
Right.
they should be making sure that this is a cross-disciplinary, looking at all this, like mapping all the important stakeholders in the company.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, giving everybody that type of user-centric approach, I think is
Yeah.
a good point.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Do you have any input on conversation design in app versus website?
Definitely. Oh no. I can't help myself. It depends.
Okay, we got to thank you to whoever asked that question. You succeeded.
Um, um, I would say that it really depends on the use case. That's a really difficult question to answer. So, are we talking about a bot deployed that's helping people with, in a health circumstances, at banking? But more generally, I suppose you can imagine that when people are texting, they kind of, like we talked about with the buttons versus free text, they tend to kind of prefer more buttons, or sort of kind of, in a sort of quick, I want to just get this done phase,
Mhm.
um, in general. But that, it's kind of hard to say something specific to that. But if you have a more specific question, like, get in touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was actually another question that maybe piggybacks on that a little bit,
Mm,
from the button standpoint. Is you say that users want text instead of buttons when they don't know what they want.
hmm
Does that not conflict with the findability principle?
hmm
If they don't know what to ask, how can they explore the options?
That's right. And I think it's important so let's say you don't want to use button, or so in either case, this, I think, points to the importance of the action reply message. So when you are asking the question with you're trying to program the robot to ask a question to get information from the user, and it's important to use language that. So this is where you can actually use language itself to help frame the context, to help the user understand, you know, what the parameters are that you're looking for, what are the parameters of the input that you're looking
Mm,
for. And you can actually just use language. You can actually use the sentence. So for example, um, I don't know, I could go, what,
mhm.
right? And you're like, yeah, what, right? And I'm like, well, what kind of pizza do you want, right? And you go, oh yeah, I want, mushrooms
Mm,
and right. So if you just kind of make the request a little bit more specific and
mhm,
I'm providing you context when I say, well, what kind of pizza, rather than what,
mhm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think there's also an opportunity to, if you look at, how a conversation might evolve, that, yeah, maybe it's more necessary to have more of a guiding factor initially to help the user understand what's possible,
Yeah.
and then be able to then, get down to more of a open flow conversation
Mhm.
is interesting.
Yeah.
Um, all right, let's see. Should there be a change in tone of voice depending on the use case,
Mhm.
i.e., customer support questions versus proactive sales?
For sure. Um, if you one of the things that we wanna be conscious of when you're, thinking about proactive sales is you're gonna use language that's gonna be more persuasive, right? So this is where you're starting to use, sort of more persuasive language,
Mhm,
right? Because you're kind of trying to lead the customer, to a certain, to kind of meet your ends a
mhm,
little bit more. Whereas with customer support, you wanna use some persuasive language, but actually, that's just more, you kind of wanna use more language that's, you know, uh, helping. You want to make sure that the user feels understood as possible, right?
yep,
So there's slightly too, when you're being more persuasive, you want them to feel understood, but you actually want to help influence a little bit, like the direction of the conversation, versus in the customer support, you want to actually focus specifically on making sure that they feel understood
yep.
and that they're getting that kind of help that they need.
Yep, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Hmm.
All right, how about this? What is the biggest downside of making a dialogue where you ask, did you mean A or B?
Say that again.
So, what's the biggest downside of making a dialogue where you ask, did you mean tacos or pizza?
Okay. Oh, what's the biggest downside?
Yeah.
If you got one of, if they didn't want either one.
Okay. Yeah, I think we saw that in the false one of the false positive examples. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, I'll just give you a real world example. So in human dialogues, if I let's say we're talking and you say I say did you say you wanted a salad? Right?
Hmm.
And you did say you wanted a salad. So you think, okay, you've understood what I said. You were just sort of doubting your own memory a little bit.
Hmm.
If I say, did you want fries or chicken nuggets? I'm like, what am I talking about? Like with these like examples, and they're not actually like the healthiest foods anyway.
Yeah. What are
Anyway,
you trying
yeah, I know.
to?
Yeah. But
What kind of trends are you trying to promote here?
yeah, but if I give you those two options and what you wanted was a salad, you're like, what are you talking about? You weren't paying attention to me at all,
Mm,
right? So as our as our kind of human memory kind of fails and our human prediction rates get lower, we tend to offer more options, but then they kind of that gets demonstrated to the listener because they go, okay, well, you didn't understand what I'm saying. You really weren't paying attention to me, and actually now I don't feel understood. Whereas if the two A or B options are actually in the realm of kind of what I was talking about, but I just want to clarify a little bit between the two. It's like, okay, you know, I wanted a pizza and you weren't sure if I wanted green or red sauce on the pizza. Where did that come from? Um, sorry. I don't know what's going
you
on.
have some interesting thoughts in your
Yeah,
mind
I
today.
know. Then at least you know that we're engaged.
Yeah.
We have a mutual understanding
No, that
between
makes
us, right?
sense. Yep.
And so we're kind of we're moving the conversation forward in a way. So that's when if you do use A or B, you want to make sure that your predictions on A and B are they don't have to be kind of at a really high they don't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to have super high percentage rates on those, but you want to make sure that they're high enough that they're not just totally random.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, how important is it to write short responses that, let's say, fit in the screen without having to scroll down?
That's incredibly important.
Yeah.
um, that's another kind of situation where people get annoyed.
Hmm.
um, they get lost in the
Hmm.
conversation if they have to scroll back. um, and we have to remember, you know, for the VA, the point isn't to give necessarily the most comprehensive answer. If you can redirect people to the most comprehensive answer,
Right.
the point is that you're trying to you have a tool here where people can get the most textually or contextually relevant response as possible as quickly as possible
Right.
without the need to wait in some queue, right?
Right.
So what you want to do is point people to the most contextually relevant information and um, present that information to them in as concise a way as possible.
Right. Because I mean, we might be texting each other, and I might send you a link to an interesting article. I don't necessarily have to write out all the everything that's in the article, right? It might
Exactly.
be a short introduction of this is why this is interesting to you.
That's right.
Now check it out. So that could be interesting. Yeah.
That's a really good example, and I think part of our expectations for what we expect in VA interactions is going to come from past experiences with the VAs. But part of it is also going to come if we're to the question about the mobile phone, is it's coming from the fact that we're texting each other a lot. So if you send somebody a text, sometimes I don't know if this happened to you, where I've received a text from my mom that's been like a letter, you know?
Yeah.
And you're
You're
like,
like, I don't
okay,
even know where to start on this.
yeah, right. And you're like, okay, this is really ridiculous. So you want to keep that kind of thing in mind. You want to, and this is about, you know, aligning with users, with the mental model of the users for what they're expecting as well, and keeping things short fits within that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, but let's see. Do customers perceive a bot of being a lower quality, for example, when using a lot of these questions?
Say it again.
So if the bot is um, maybe using a lot of questions to get to the right information,
Mhm.
do do users perceive that as being of lower quality? I think if I understand correctly.
I would say that it depends on the, way the questions are being asked.
Hmm.
So, if the questions are being asked without, um, indicating that you've understood, what the user says. So one thing that's really helpful actually is kind of, writing in your action replies where you're repeating information, that is probably gonna be coming from the user. So, I can say to you, "What?"
Hmm.
Right? And then that just sounds really abrasive. But if I kind of add a, "Ah, um" okay, sticking with the trend. Ah, pasta sauce? What kind? Ah, okay. Did you want the right? And you kind of, if you add contextually relevant information in the follow-up questions, it indicates to the user that you've understood what they're saying and you
Mm,
just need more information. And it kind of and then the question starts to trigger an innate need that we have as end users to be helpful.
mhm,
So one of the things that we want to do with our conversation design is trigger this sort of, we are naturally quite cooperative. And if you use language that triggers that, our need actually to be more cooperative in conversation, then we will do that. And you can use that kind of subconscious trigger in building really cool conversations.
excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got a flurry of, of questions here towards the end. Maybe if we can do one last quick one, which I think is really interesting,
Mm.
is would you say that this will take over people's jobs in the future, or provide more jobs in return? I have some thoughts on that if you want to
Yeah.
give it.
I, do you want to start? I'll say what I yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question, and it was a question that I thought a lot about before, coming into this industry, especially coming from a service industry, and that was really something that I thought about.
Yeah.
I think what I really like about at least our approach here is that we have an easy to use platform that makes it so that people who would normally be answering these questions, let's say in a call center, actually have the opportunity to work directly in this technology. And
Mhm.
because there's oftentimes the big subject matter experts, and they know their users the best when it comes to actually, delivering what the users need, is that it actually creates new career paths where that might actually be more interesting and more fulfilling for them to do. So I think
Yeah.
that's one component of it. But I think you were also talking about how, ideally this is actually a handoff between the two of a virtual agent and a human agent, and that there's an opportunity for really good collaboration between the two, right?
Definitely. There's no doubt that in the future, fewer people will be doing um, boring stuff like answering repetitive questions that we can actually get VAs to do.
Hmm.
So, and that's just like we've seen in the past, like this is just how technology works.
Hmm.
Um, Slavery in the United States ended because of the invention of the cotton gin. So
Hmm.
you didn't need people hand picking cotton, you had a machine to do it,
Hmm.
right? So I think like in some ways you could think of people asking really sitting at in a call center answering really dull questions over and over and over again.
Hmm.
We're actually going to free people up from that.
Hmm.
And as you said, these machines, and I think the fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that we're going to have to continue to do research on the data that comes in from it
Absolutely.
indicates that there's going to be people that have to do that work.
Yeah.
So it will create more and more jobs, more interesting jobs. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's probably more interesting to some of us nerds, at least, like analyzing what kind of language chat log data than it would be trying to answer a question about, I don't know, how do I apply for my card?
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw, some really, really bright, valuable people in my previous career getting their time mostly spent answering the same question over and over again, and it did not bring them joy. And
No,
and I think, when we talk about this as a user-centric approach, I think, we look at users beyond just who's interacting with, the technology as the end users, but also kind of the population as a whole, and
yeah,
that there's actually some really positive opportunities to be able to solve some of the problems that are out there by having that type of collaboration and identifying who is the best person or role to address these questions or these tasks.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
There's opportunities here for conversational AI will facilitate certain things. For example, there's research that shows that people are who are having mental health issues often feel less stigma talking openly about those with a
Mm.
robot
Hmm.
than they would with a person. So actually, in some ways, that actually might increase people getting the help that they need in that area through conversational AI, which then actually will potentially increase the amount of mental health nursing jobs or something like
Yeah.
that, right? So it's really hard to say definitively like how this will impact us in the future, but um, I think the most important thing is that we um, imagine and take a data-driven approach to how we are developing the technology,
Hmm.
and what kind of interactions we're developing, because we know realistically this is going to become something that is going to become more and more popular.
Hmm.
So let's sort of take the challenge head on,
Yep.
think about what the possibilities are, and do it. Take a kind of as human-centered an approach as possible to make so that we actually are improving people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I could have come up with a better way to end the talk today.
Yeah,
I think that's what this has all been about is
yeah.
coming back to that. So, um, for those of you who we weren't able to get to your questions, thank you for your questions. We'll do our best to follow up with you. Thank you for your participation today. Hopefully that gave you some good things to think about, and thanks for your insights, Cam.
Yeah.
Like you said, we will be sending out a link to the recording. So if you want to watch it again or share that with any of your colleagues or clients or so on that you think would be relevant, that will be available. But thanks for joining us. Stay safe and have a good one. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good weekend. Or no, it's not Friday yet.